This presentation will look briefly at loss prevention in the context of technical and practical challenges associated with container ship casualty management and how they might compare in the unfortunate event of an incident involving a mega-box vessel, all from a surveyor's perspective. I'll also touch on some case studies and examples at various stages throughout, before concluding with a roundup of some of the lessons learned from previous cases. So, as the size of container ships steadily increases, so will the level of difficulty in managing a casualty of this vessel type. Ultra-large container ships, also referred to as mega-box ships, involves vessels with a minimum carrying capacity of around 14,500 TEU. Today, some of the largest vessels have capacities in excess of 20,000 TEU. I think this image on screen actually puts into perspective of what John was saying before, that all it takes is one misdeclared unit, and it could be potentially very catastrophic, especially in this particular incident. So, in any casualty incident, there are numerous technical and practical challenges that must be considered in order to try to minimize the loss. These include assessing the ship's condition, obtaining accurate information and data gathering, and locating a suitable port of refuge. It's important to get an understanding of the condition of the casualty as early as possible so that a proper assessment of the ship's structural integrity, stability, and potential for cargo loss or damage can be determined, therefore safeguarding any crew remaining on board and minimizing any potential impact on the environment. Early assessment can also help to determine the number and type of assets required to assist the casualty and thus speed up the production of a salvage plan, potentially minimizing further damage to the vessel and cargo. The type of information required to enable a proper assessment may consist of the ship's loaded condition prior to the incident, general arrangement and tank capacity plans, stability books, cargo manifests, bay plans, and ideally the BAPLI file. A correct and accurate BAPLI file and cargo manifests are particularly important in the early stages, as this information will help to identify and locate declared dangerous goods and those cargoes potentially hazardous when exposed to heat, fire, and/or water, the latter of which can have an impact on the nature of the extinguishing medium used, for example, in the case of a fire and explosion. Just to put this into perspective, highlighted in blue on the screen shows the spread of reactive cargoes sensitive to moisture found on a smaller container vessel that suffered a fire and explosion in recent years. I'm sure you'll all agree that any sort of ingress would result in potentially catastrophic consequences, and even more so had this been a mega-box vessel. Other information important when making the initial assessment would include ship's drafts, list angle, trim, condition of tanks, weight and contents of containers, and the nature and type of seabed if the vessel is aground. A grounded mega-box vessel poses some major challenges, particularly if lightering is required in order to refloat the vessel, given the difficulty in locating and bringing suitable cranes alongside the vessel with the required height and reach. And secondly, once a suitable response plan has been initiated, the next step is to locate a port and place of refuge. Although container ports can generally be described as very efficient, there are relatively few that have the facilities required to handle hundreds or potentially thousands of containers affected by a casualty incident at short notice. In the case of a mega-box ship casualty, this presents several other issues due to the size of the vessel and the height of the container stacks, which make it difficult to find suitable cargo handling facilities with sufficient draft to accommodate the casualty. There's also the issue of space to accommodate both sound and damaged containers and enable joint survey of affected units. One case I'm sure most of you are familiar with is the 6,750 TEU container vessel MSC Flaminia. This image on screen shows the size of the space used to store both sound and affected containers offloaded from this vessel, which was not fully laden at the time. I should also point out that the area at the top of the image was a storage yard was a storage yard and inspection area, and the area below was used to handle waste management and disposal. Had this particular incident involved a 20,000 plus TEU mega-box vessel, then it's very likely that this space would have been insufficient. Other considerations include adequate security at the site to enable cargo lanes to be properly maintained while salvage and/or GA security is being collected. In the case of the Yantian Express, we had to install a perimeter fence, which was required to make sure no units left site before security was collected. And finally, disposal facilities for waste cargo, debris, and potentially large volumes of contaminated firefighting water should also be borne in mind when locating a port of refuge. But perhaps one of the most important factors in locating the port of refuge, however, is cooperation and continued communication with local authorities, as it is likely that this is the first time that they have dealt with the issues that arise from a major casualty incident. And these can include business interruption, pollution prevention, and clean-up, as well as possible damages to port infrastructure. And in the case of a mega-box incident, such liabilities have the potential to be insurmountable and very expensive. So once the vessel has been made safe and allowed to berth at a port of refuge, the next logistical task is to ensure that all equipment and materials are ready to commence discharge, that all parties involved are kept informed in readiness for joint surveys, and that facilities are in place and ready to handle any waste. Prior to discharge of affected units from the casualty, it is important, first of all, to determine whether those containers can be handled and offloaded safely. In the case of a fire, there will likely be numerous containers on board that contain cargoes which will continue to smoulder until the unit is discharged and the contents removed, spread out on the quayside, and extinguished. This is obviously the case in that particular one on screen. The next difficulty we've got: units flooded and submerged in firefighting water may also contain water-absorbing cargoes, which render the containers bulging and overweight, therefore potentially doubling the weight of the unit. This could greatly affect the longitudinal strength of the container and potentially cause the unit to collapse upon lifting, resulting in the contents falling back into the ship's hold. By way of example, in the case of the Napoli, the record lifting weight for a 20-foot unit containing fiberboard sheets was 87 tons. Okay, there we go. I believe this is actually footage from a unit being taken from the Napoli. Once discharging of the vessel is well underway and a sufficient number of units have been offloaded, container surveys can then commence, which is not always straightforward, as can be seen. An important part of post-casualty management is dealing with the myriad of surveyors involved, typically consisting of representatives acting for owners, charterers, slot charterers, general average if declared, salvors, cargo interests, and port or customs authorities. For logistical reasons, surveys consist of door-end inspections only, with the aim to have all parties agree or indeed disagree whether the cargo remains sound, partly damaged with the potential for salvage, or a complete total loss and therefore requiring disposal. And finally, managing waste disposal. This may require the use of additional storage space to house containers and cargo waiting to be sent for landfill, or indeed cleaning of total loss units and segregation of materials for recycling. Then there is the issue of handling and disposing of any waste firefighting water remaining on board the vessel, which is an entire topic on its own and one which unfortunately there's little time to cover here. Just by way of an example, that doesn't look like I think we actually removed some of the water in that case to the ballast tanks, but there was a large volume prior to that. And just to conclude, following a casualty, as much information as possible should be provided to enable a proper assessment of the situation and of the vessel's current condition, thus enabling a suitable response plan to be formulated and potentially therefore minimizing loss of the casualty and its cargo. Cooperation between all parties involved is important, particularly local authorities at the port or place of refuge who may not have dealt with a mega-boxship casualty before. And lastly, time is crucial but can't necessarily be controlled in a casualty situation. Having your appointed surveyor mobilized as soon as possible is vital, as this individual will be your eyes and ears on the ground, providing live information as it occurs and a key link between the huge number of parties involved, therefore ensuring management of the casualty both from the ship and the shore side, which is perhaps crucial more than ever in the dawn of mega-box ships. Thank you.